Cognitive approaches to second language learning and introduction. Now we move on to looking at another approach or another set of approaches that can be clustered under this cognitive approach to second language learning. Cognitive approach is related to the mental approach of language learning. So cognitive would mean something that is related to the knowledge of the stored in the mind. Now, how are these cognitive approaches different from universal grammar approaches that we talked about before? So remember that universal grammar was more of a property theory rather than learning theory, although we could apply some aspects or could learn some aspects from there to increase our understanding of the second language. However, that was primarily a property theory focusing only on language. Cognitive theories, on the other hand, or the cognitive approach, on the other hand, are transition theories. They are focused on the learning of the language. That is, they are in transition, evolving or the learning of the language. So, universal grammar focused on the properties of the first language, basically. However, those working in the second language field learned how they analyze the first language properties and try to understand the properties of the second language learning. But primarily, the universal grammar focused on the learning, not on the learning, but the properties of the first language. Cognitive approaches, on the other hand, are focused on the processing of the information, that is the learning process of the languages, whether they are the first languages or they are the second languages or any number of languages. They are interested in the learning process. Then another difference is that universal grammar was interested in knowing about the similarities and differences of learned languages. Because it was focused on languages, it wanted to see what are the features which are similar or different in different languages. Having said that, let me remind you, basically they were more interested in finding out the similarities rather than the differences. Cognitive approaches, on the other hand, are interested in the differences in the language learning process. Yes, they are also interested in finding the similarities across the learning process, but that actually is not their aim. So they give equal importance to the similarities or differences in the of the individual learners across different languages. Then, if you would remember that universal grammar makes this difference between performance, which is related to the use of the language, and competence, that is the knowledge that the learner has in his or her mind, but which is not apparent to other people. On the other hand, cognitive approaches, several of them do not make this differentiation. So most of them do take language learning as a whole component and do not like to differentiate between the knowledge of the language in the mind, competence, and the use of the language. There are, even when in instances where they do sort of make a slight differentiation between the two, they still want a model or to construct a model that explains both It does not focus only on competence like your universal grammar approach does. So cognitive approaches are more focused on the processing of information that is used in the performance of the language or the language use, rather than the focus on competence, which was the prime area of your universal grammar. So cognitive approaches will also look at the strategies used by the learners. How is fluency developed? How do learners process information? And what is the relationship between input and output? So cognitive approaches, please remember, still are focused on the learner, but they are interested in only the psychological or mental aspects of the learner.